and we'll start with our talk. So in our fifth episode of this SFU Sports Analytics virtual seminar series, we have two brilliant young minds who worked as analysts in professional sports. So we have Sarah Bailey, and she is the manager of analytics and data at the Los Angeles Rams. Sarah owns a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from University of the Pacific and a Master's of Science in Statistics from SFU. She was a South by Southwest panel member, how data is revolutionizing, sorry about that, the NFL. NBA Hackathon in 2017, and she also won the Hockey Graph Data Sprint in 2017. Dani is one of my best friends. He's one of my favorite people in the world. We have worked together starting when he was an undergrad student in SFU until this day, actually. Even though he is younger than me, I always say that I want to be like him, like as a human and also as a professional. Dani is a quantitative analyst at the Seattle Kraken. He owns a Bachelor's of Science in Mathematics and Computer Sciences and Statistics from SFU as well, and a Master's of Science in Statistics from SFU. He was a graduate intern, basketball strategy and analytics in the NBA at 2019. And obviously, he was one of the group members who won the NFL Big Data Bowl College Division. So today, Dani and Sarah will discuss their careers in sports analytics and their experiences as new graduates entering the industry. They will describe and talk about how they got hired, what their roles are, and their responsibilities, and also the challenges that they faced in their work. So hopefully this talk would help those in the audience who seek to follow them in breaking into the sports analytics world. So Dani and Sarah, I will now stop sharing my screen and I will let you have the stage. Here you go.
Okay, Eli, can you see this properly?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for the intro. Love you too, like a best friend, and want to be like you too. So the feelings are mutual. Sarah, you there?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. And we'll get started. This is kind of going to be our journeys from SFU to the big leagues, and there's going to be a lot of parallels between the two of us, but also some quite a few differences. So we hope you get a lot out of the talk. And Sarah, I'll kick it off to you.
Yeah. So we're going to talk. I mean, this is less typical and what you guys usually hear. You know, hear theory and actual presentations, but since we can't really talk about that, we're just going to kind of talk about our backgrounds. I will say that I actually judged the competition that Dani won, so that's just my little side blurb. But yeah, so I'm the manager of data and analytics at Los Angeles Rams. That was a more recent promotion, but my education and experience, it's similar to Dani's on paper, but our experience and kind of how we got to our roles is a lot different. I went to school in the States, went on a track scholarship at the University of the Pacific, finished up my math degree there, and then after that I got an opportunity to intern with the San Diego Chargers. It was at that point that I actually went into their digital media team and was doing digital media analytics, and it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to get into, but my theory was that you get your foot in the door at an NFL team, you now have references from an NFL team, and you can put that kind of thing on your resume and get exposure to just the inner dynamics of a professional sports team, because it's something you have to learn, like your hierarchy and the people that you would report to and kind of how things flow and where your position would fit in. So after that internship, I actually I passed a couple actuarial exams and was like, okay, well, I'll go and do some actuarial work and see if it's something that would even interest me if sports analytics doesn't pan out, if it's a backup plan. Ended up hating it. Did not do the office job very well. Got there at 8 and by 9 o'clock was ripping my eyes out. So decided, you know what, I need more education. I didn't have a stats background. It was pure math. So went back to school at Simon Fraser and really just chose a master's program there because of the work that professors had done in sports analytics and knowing that I could surround my thesis in that area and would have the support of an advisor. And while there, you know, just did the best to go in as many like data competitions and hackathons as possible that emphasize sports and just do independent research and looking at my own experience and where I was lacking, whether it was from a knowledge of the sport in general or the stats side, just trying to fill both sides of the equation. While I was in finishing my master's, I applied for a job with the Rams in August, and I did mine in a year and a half. I kind of wanted to accelerate it and get back into working. In August, I applied. I didn't really hear anything. It was a very long process. October, you know, you finally started getting phone interviews, and they flew me in for an in-person interview. And then I didn't hear from them for 6 weeks. They ghosted, completely silence, radio silence. So I started applying for other jobs. I was like, there's no way I got it. Like, at least let me know, guys. But they ended up calling in November and offering me the job. And essentially their thing was they were looking at hiring multiple people. And so they went through another wave of interview and wanted to make sure that the role that they offered me fit with whoever else they hired. What ended up happening is they hired 2 of us, and I was primarily in the sport performance side. So I started that in December 2017, right after I finished my master's. Pretty much just drove down and started working with one other guy who we started on a 6-month contract, and I stayed and he left. So then in August of this year, after once he left, I started to expand my role into personnel and coaching and other areas and got a title change in August of 2020, which was exciting and came along with some other interest from other teams that kind of prompted a promotion. So.
Yeah, so I think we're going to hear a lot of similar threads to Sarah's in my kind of story. So I went to SFU for my undergrad between 2013 and 2018, and I did my master's stats between 2018 and 2019. And really, I had the benefit of I was going to school to become a math teacher, and then I learned that you could do sports analytics, and I was like, okay, well, I can kind of explore computer science and stats and math without sacrificing any chances of becoming a teacher later on. And so if things don't work out, I can still follow that original plan. But also I don't have any like strictness of which courses I need to take or anything like that. So I really had the freedom to explore and like build my own degree. For our masters, Sarah and I both had the same supervisor. So Tim was both of our supervisors, and that was a really great experience for me the past year and a half as well. During that time, a sports analytics club was started up by Tim Schwartz and Luke Bourne, and they kind of had some students take the lead on that for the first year, and then Lucas and I and Abe and Matt at various points jumped in as co-presidents after their tenure was up, and really kind of organized hackathons and did projects and tried to coordinate students together to work on sports analytics projects together. 2019, one of those projects was the NFL Big Data Bowl, and that was kind of really what set off a lot of interest in all of us, and it's been like a really world-changing moment for us that put us on people's radar. And then in 2019, I also got to intern at the NBA, which was an absolute dream experience, to live in New York for 4 months and talk basketball all the time. And I didn't know that things could get any better, but then I got the job at the Kraken, and it has. So that kind of story is, I met Alexandra Mandricki, who's now my boss at the Hockey Graphs Data Sprint. You mentioned that, you saw Sarah mention that she was on our team, or I was part of her team. I met my boss there for the first time, just got to know her. I got to meet her again when we presented some of that work at Van Hack a year later. She was then there at Cassis, so a couple of big SFU events, and was presenting posters there, and one of them was about rowing, and Alex is a former rower, still gets out on the water every once in a while, I think, but that was a really cool thing to kind of connect with her on. And then finally in 2019 went through an interview process and was offered the job. So really, you can see from the story, like, it was 3 years of work and meeting people before I was offered the job, and really kind of SFU events that I got to meet people in the sports analytics world that really kind of led to this connection to get me here. And then 2020 of this year in January, I started work right as I was finishing up my master's. So we're going to dive into our primary role. So I'll kick it off back to Sarah to go through what she does.
Yeah, so I primarily, we have 3 different areas in the job. The first is personnel, which is looking at NFL free agents, college free agents, college recruits, whatever the 2 different groups are. Then you can just fill up the whole page if you want. So what you do in the personnel group is, we're working with college projections and seeing who kind of has traits that stand out. What variables are important in college is one of the big things that the scouts like to look at, because you're overwhelmed. You get scouting reports from pretty much anyone who claims they're draft eligible is going to get a scouting report. And you have variables anywhere from their high school data to all the way to college and their senior year, what kind of mental aspects, what kind of things that their coaches say about them. There's thousands of data points on any given player. So one of the biggest things is just fine tuning that. Like, what do we need to look at in the final stages? What comes in important at different rounds? How do certain players project well based on their college stats? Is there any correlation? Does it matter? Does it matter by position? How long are they expected to last? Different things in that. And then similarly with NFL free agents, looking at, their career progression and how they'd be, what kind of other players in the pro league that they could stack up against. Like I said, when I was initially hired, the biggest thing was sports science. So I spent a good year and a half building and improving, working with our sports science director and improving that area in our team, and mostly starting with data collection and how can we get better at consistency, because we can't, as all you guys know, you can't do anything if the data is wrong or inaccurate, or if it's not collected at the right timing or consistently. So worked with that and built load management practices and injury prevention, trying to limit the probability of getting injuries that you can prevent. It's football. You're gonna get concussions. You're gonna get big hits. Looking at the ones that are more soft tissue that, maybe it was a lack of training or there was some indication early on that would have flagged a warning. And then more recently, we've been working with coaches just at some of the hot topics that you see, decision making, just very, very basic, getting into kind of touching our feet and sort of getting used to working with them and what we can do to help ease their processes. A lot of the things that we do aren't necessarily like building models every day. It could be as simple as like the models that we've built to tag certain plays and videos. They don't necessarily use those models, but they'll use the tag, and it can help simplify processes and just make everyone's job more efficient is the ultimate goal.
Cool. Yeah. So we are in a unique situation where we don't have any players yet. And so a big part of what we're doing right now is pro player evaluation, just because we're going to have this unique opportunity to take 30 players, a player from each team. And so like with Sarah, with other free, like work, like sometimes you make a couple decisions at the trade deadline and a bunch of decisions in free agency, but a lot of the work you do might not actually lead to a decision of, oh, we're going to sign this guy. Whereas we are at this point have this unique opportunity where we're going to get to make 30 decisions no matter what, and at least 30 decisions when we talk about trades and stuff like that. So that's a big part that we're trying to nail before our expansion draft. The other parts, a week after our expansion draft, will be part of the amateur draft. And so we're going to have our amateur models built up and ready to go for that first draft. When we eventually get players, the plan is to have some work into on-ice strategy, but we haven't really dove into that yet. And then finally, like I said, expansion draft strategy and optimizing our expansion draft picks is going to be super important. And so not only do we need to evaluate players well, but we need to make sure we get the game theory aspect of the expansion draft right. So there's going to be some work that we do in that field. So now we're going to compare our kind of team structures a little bit. So again, I'll kick it off to Sarah.
So our team structure is interesting. We're, I would say that our work in data and analytics is advanced, but our team is small, and that's been beneficial for myself because I get to dabble in everything. Like I talked about, like I can do draft work, I can do personnel and free agency, and I can do sport performance and coaching because I'm the only analyst that does kind of the modeling side of it. But essentially, like, we have a lot of autonomy in the work that we do. There's no direct person that we report to, but there is levels of hierarchy. So mostly, if we're going to report to one person, it'll be the general manager. We have a very good communication with him. Les is really open to hearing our opinions and looking at different projects that we've done. So that's great because you don't hear a lot about that from other teams where you have the ability to send a rogue email and be like, hey, this is some work that I'm doing. What do you think of it? And he'll respond and look at it and read it and offer like, hey, well, this is cool, but what about this? Like, can you look into here? Or so we have conversations like that. We have the data architect and engineer. So that's the guy who takes in all the data, organizes it, works with the APIs, make sure it's structurally sound and that it's accurate. We work together a lot on cleaning on the front end. So instead of me having to go through every time and get rid of these outliers, we can establish processes together where I've found a consistent, hey, if this value is out of this range, then like we're not even going to use that data. It's useless. That's an outlier. Can you get rid of it on your end so I don't have to deal with that process every time? So we do things like that. And we have our software developer, and him and our data guy created our internal scouting system, which is used on the football side, and everyone, it's the pretty version. So if I create a visual for our sports science team that looks at flagging players and we've created it on the back end now, we've decided we like it, we decided it's useful information, so our software developer can now hard code that into our website and makes the process a lot easier. So we kind of all work together, but we work independently too and have unique and distinct roles. And then obviously there's me, the analyst, and I take all the clean data and try and do something with it, try and make it useful and actionable.
Yeah, so ours is quite similar. We're lucky that there's been a big investment from ownership group from the start. So Alexandra Mandricki, who I mentioned before, is our director of hockey administration, and she was actually hired before our general manager was, and she actually helped pick out our general manager, Ron Francis, who's absolutely incredible. And once he was picked, like, there was a funny thing where Alex was hired beforehand, but Ron still had final say of whether he kept her around. And the smart guy he is kept her around, and they get along great, and they have a great relationship. So Alex is really kind of the visionary and kind of has everyone, has the hockey CBA tools, has the stat side of things, has the computer science things, can talk to the data engineer developer, can talk to us as analysts, can talk to Ron, and really has a plan for our team, which is really fantastic to have, but also doesn't mean that we don't get to talk to kind of our stakeholders. So we still have very open lines of communication with our GM and our assistant GM and our group there. We have a senior quant, Namita, who's came from the Eagles, who's really, really great. And I work with her as the quantitative analyst quite a bit. And we bounce ideas off each other, and we're constantly working together. And it's great to kind of have that teamwork. And then just like Sarah, we have a developer and a data engineer who are both incredible at their jobs, make everything look pretty for us when we're communicating stuff to our stakeholders, and then making everything really easy to work with on the back end. We're in a little bit of a unique spot, which I'll talk about more later, where like we're starting everything from scratch. So there's still a little bit of work to do to clean up all of our processes, but we can really start to see kind of how all those pipelines fit together, and it's going to be really powerful once we're up and running at our full capacity. So I added this slide in for at the last second here, but I realized we were talking a lot about like kind of just like the everyday. Like I wanted to touch on a little bit and let Sarah talk about the cool stuff that she's been able to do while with the Rams.
Yeah, Dani threw this one at me at like 9:55, so thanks for that. But it's all work. You know, it is a lot of fun. We have a great team. We joke around a lot. I get to wear sweatpants to work. Like everyone's talking about, oh, we're working from home now. We wear sweatpants. I'm like, that's new. But obviously, you know, going to the Super Bowl was such a great experience. Didn't pan out the way we wanted, but just I traveled with the team the last 2 years. Not really as part of my job, but it was just an extra kind of bonus, like a little extra job, like side work that I did. And like, I mean, we got to go to Hawaii for preseason. We got to go to Napa. We got to go to London. We got to go, you know, all over the place. Just may only spend a day and a half there, and it probably killed me because we get back at 4 and you just go straight to the office. But it was so much fun, and like we're young and just traveling and getting to experience like team successes and team highs and lows, and like, you know, when you're doing bad, it's frustrating, but it's really fun to see the snap back and like, okay, well, more on Monday and Tuesday. It's like, okay, guys, everyone get their act together. Let's relax. Let's get back into the grind of things. And just being in that environment. Like, I mean, I was an athlete all my life, and it's just, you get into a competitive mindset where you get to carry that to work, and you're competing to win. And whatever your role plays the smallest part, like, ultimately, you know, we have the same goal, and that's to win a Super Bowl. And I love being a part of that, whether you think you're just doing a little bit or a lot, it doesn't matter. You're contributing in some way.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, we haven't had that travel experience yet, but there is this unique, again, opportunity about starting from scratch and starting from the ground up. And so this is a picture of me here at our first scouts meetings, the first scouts meetings ever for the Seattle Kraken. We didn't even have a name at that point, but just being there and being in the room and just listening to everything that they were saying and having their plans for the expansion draft and everything was just unreal. Another, I feel like, perk, which Sarah's rocking her new Rams gear, which I haven't got my Kraken stuff over the border yet, but you know, all the merch and stuff that you can get. You can see Ron and Ricky rocking their NHL Seattle gear. That's always a plus when you're working for a team. But really kind of being on this inside information and you know, being in the behind the scenes of the team is just so cool. And
the gear notoriety wears off, Dani. Like when your closet is 70% Ram stuff, you're like, all right, who wants it? You get a shirt.
Especially when you go through a rerun and you can't wear the old stuff anymore.
Like, give any other stuff.
Yeah. So it's all cool, and for us, we're building a new arena, and so not only are we going to have like the first puck drop and the first home game and the first playoff game, we're also going to have the first concert and the first, you know, just all those firsts for the team and for the city is just going to be super exciting. So it's just an unreal experience to be a part of the club. Okay, so now some of the work. So kind of what data are we working with? We talked about what kind of our roles and responsibilities are, but this is kind of the landscape of data in football and hockey.
Yeah, so we have a ton of data. You have anywhere. So PFF is the main source for play-by-play data, where they summarize all the certain types of play, who's on the field, what like number of hits, where just everything. I can't even think of the landscape that you have. Special teams data, offense, defense, really makes it easy to filter through plays when you're looking at certain situations. You can cross that with the next gen data, which is the XY data that everyone's so familiar with. You can oftentimes, you marry the two relationships so that instead of having to use analytics to filter plays, you can actually use PFF that's already done it and make your job a lot quicker. So you can kind of get to the gist of what you're trying to accomplish with that data. Then you have sports science data, which is honestly, it's like I talk about it a lot because it's kind of where I started, but it's really cool, the stuff you're collecting on players. Like you have your own chips during practice, you have certain jump data that you get, you have the weight rooms all rigged up to get all their lifts are measuring force and velocity. And there's just a lot of cool stuff there that you can look at from a different side, where you can also marry it to their on-field performance and try and get the best that you can do. And then in college, college is interesting because it's you do have similar PFF data, and then you have all your scouting reports and your combine, and you get into what's the most useful information about college. Well, it's usually the scouting reports and the visual eye test, but you want to be able to turn those into numbers and not just look at a biased approach and then it changes if your scouting team changes or you change your grade scheme. So you worked with a lot of inconsistencies there, but also trying to kind of convert old scouting reports into the new level so that you can make it usable.
Cool. And we're very similar on the NHL side. So we get the kind of generic NHL play-by-play that is available to the public, but we also get augmented play-by-play data from vendors. And we've been promised that tracking data will be coming soon for a while now, but so at some point we'll be getting tracking data like Sarah gets to play with. And then in other leagues and amateur leagues, it really is such a varied landscape. Football has this nice thing of, having college football as their main source, whereas hockey players come from all over the world, and there's all sorts of Swedish leagues and Russian leagues and different Euro leagues and different amateur tournaments. And then there's also some augmented play-by-play that is given from some of those leagues by vendors, but definitely not all of them. And so and then we also are getting scouting reports in from our scouts right now, and you get to go and read them, and there's really useful information in there. But we haven't started to dig into those yet, just because again our scouts are just starting, so we're just starting to get a baseline kind of repository of scouting reports. And so now we're going to finish off with a couple of challenges that we face in our day-to-day work.
So one of the biggest things with NFL and what has made the NGS data so useful is that it's really hard to distribute credit to a player on a given play. You talk about, PFF gives grades and everything, and they're useful to an extent, but you're not looking at when a pass is thrown and the DB is covering their player, so they're not even targeted that player anymore. And that could have been the first read, but you don't actually know the intention of plays. So when you're looking at different credit distribution, it's really hard. You can look at your own intention and what was planned, but looking at other teams and other players, like you don't know whether their first look was to the wide out, or whether was it supposed to be a slant route, or whether it was supposed to be a go route. You don't know really. And it could be that the DB did a really good job of covering their player, and so that was immediately erased. Or it could be another difference, or they changed the look right away. So it's hard to distribute credit on a play, and the NGS data does help with that, but it also is limited. You only have 3 years of data. First year is kind of a scratch. Every year they kind of make changes to it, or they decide, hey, no, actually the acceleration isn't really useful. So like maybe hold off on using that data point because we're still fine tuning the technology behind it. Injury data is a tough one. You look at the sports science team, but again, you're limited. You're only looking at your data essentially. And when you look into a league perspective, you really just get these vague injury reports where so-and-so missed a date, and was it really injury based, or was it just like, we workload they workload manage certain players because he's getting at the end of his career. And then when you're talking about the game, you know, you can look at a play where an injury occurred, but do you know how severe that injury was? Was that something that knocked them out of practice for 3 weeks? It's hard to marry those injury reports and where the injury occurred and whether it was something that was preventable or not. A lot of it is buy-in to, you know, we've done a good job at showing the importance of data, but showing the importance of analytics where you know, you don't understand necessarily where the number, they might not understand where the number came from, and trying to explain a model that may not be a simple correlation or linear model is something you don't really want to get into. You hope that they just trust the instinct because you can explain it to an extent, but you know, you're not going to give them a master's level stat class and they don't really care. They just want to know the result, but they also want to buy in and go into intuition. So you play a lot with challenging intuition while also promoting new ideas, and you know, you ease in with, hey, your intuition's right here from a data side too, but let's challenge it on this end where you might not feel like it's going with your gut. Workable data is a really tough one. Data's messy, and you guys know that too. Like it's really messy and it's inconsistent year over year. Like I say, we change a lot in scouting schemes where we're being evolutionary and the changes are for the good, but then, you know, then you have to restart. So now you only have 1 year of data or one workable year, and you can't really project anything or try and imply a player's performance off of 1 year and how they went to the league, because then you don't have it over the past years for players that are currently there. And then, you know, you work with, like, how do you measure a player's value? Are you going to measure it off of 1 year, their rookie year? Are you going to measure off the rookie contract? How does that evolve? How do you what is the best way to say, like, a player had one bad year or a player had an IR year, and does that mean they're bad? Well, not necessarily, but how well do they bounce back from that? Is there a an area that you can look at that can kind of sort of not punish them, but give a little bit of a detriment to that year because they did get hurt or they didn't get enough play time, but also, like, they're still a good player, but now they're a liability, kind of balancing that trade-off with performance and the nature of the sport.
Cool. Yeah. So for us, I think a lot of this stuff is going to be really, really true for us when we have, you know, players to get injured and, you know, that type of stuff. Yeah, for us, I think the challenges are just starting from scratch and establishing all of our data sources and, like, really being the first ones to go through and clean. And I feel like Sarah had to deal with that with the workable data point that she had. And for us, like, just getting everything up and ready to run on the data side, even though we have a fantastic data engineer, it just takes time. And so when you're trying to build models while the data is getting cleaned and all the processes are getting set up, like, you just got to kind of figure it out and do some of the data cleaning yourself. So that's been a challenge, but it's something that we're ironing out as we go. Another thing for us is due to COVID, a lot of our team has started remote, and so we've been able to actually build quite good relationships and have good conversations and get to know each other. But there is this challenge of we're not just in the office bouncing ideas off each other. We can't just be like, hey, can you look over this, like, my shoulder at this code for a second? Like, it really is like a remote experience. And so I think there's going to be benefits for us down the road with that. But as of right now, that's a challenge for us. And then finally, and I think whether you're working in pro sports or if you're working in public research, observational data and the fact that we're not running randomized controlled trials on these players is, like, a unique challenge. And the fact that it's such a high dimensional problem, this kind of goes into the player credit distribution side of things. But really, when you try to look at, like, causal models and causal effects, and you're in such a high dimensional problem with a lot of data but not enough data for the number of dimensions you're working in, you can get into a lot of challenges. And so, like, making sure you're still learning and finding out new methods while you're still doing your job is obviously a challenge, but I think that's something that everyone kind of has to deal with. So That's kind of the data side. Sarah and I also wanted to touch on kind of minority representation, how that is a challenge as well. I've heard of kind of people saying that analytics is a great way to kind of get more diversity into the game, and there's more of a meritocracy where you can show your work and get noticed. But there's been some stuff in baseball where like it's now a lot of kind of people who all look the same, coming from privileged backgrounds and going to Ivy Leagues, that are now kind of infiltrating the front offices, and it's not really being used in the way that you might hope. And so we wanted to touch on kind of our experiences as minorities working in sports. And so I will pass off to Sarah.
Yeah, so we thought we'd be remiss not to take an opportunity where you have a platform with a bunch of students who aren't in the field yet, to take the opportunity to really talk about, it is a hot topic on creating equal opportunity with COVID, and just sort of gaining traction right now, I guess, on how the minority situation in sports and in the world in general is just it's just not. There's not there yet. We're not there yet. There's not enough representations from different races. There's not enough different representations from women and male. And there's such this old school train of thought that's kind of being pushed out and being challenged right now. And so, while the topic is hot and while we're here, like let's talk about it. Let's talk about creating opportunity. I'm one of 4 females on the football side. There are 150 people in the office, and there are 4 females, and we actually do a good job of promoting women and different race. And like, I've never felt uncomfortable. We support it, but it's still there in that, more women need to apply, more minorities need to apply, and be in positions where, where we have the power to kind of promote and expand different minority groups, and not discouraging not discouraging the status, like the white male kind of structure, but also knowing that like these opportunities, this is a different, unique way for women and for minority groups to come up, where, we can't change the fact that there is no NFL for women. You can't change that, but this is a different way to get in. And it doesn't matter that you didn't play, you can understand the sport and you can understand analytics and kind of the respect that you're going to need to have to get, or be a little thick-skinned in order to kind of take the little backhanded comments in, well, you didn't play, so how do you understand? How can you ever speak the language? Well, they're changing that, and that kind of viewpoint is changing as we grow and progress and challenge kind of the narrative that's been going on. NFL is. And in analytics, analytics is a new platform, and there is still that old school train of thought, but it is kind of growing in the sense of being able to have more women in it and more minority groups. So it's a way of kind of getting your foot in the door that may not be a typical route.
Yeah, for sure. And I think off that point, like, they've started, I think there's 2 of them in the NFL, and I'm not sure around other sports, but kind of coaching and scouting kind of mentorship opportunities, because a lot, like it's very, I mean, like we at the Kraken hired the first female pro scout in Cami Granado, who's the Hockey Hall of Famer, who's like played the sport at the highest level, won a gold medal for her country, like is a really fantastic hockey mind. And the fact that it took that long to get her hired is crazy. And I think there's programs that have started to kind of be put in place to help foster scouting opportunities for those who might not have played the game themselves, but actually have played the game themselves in the NHL or in the NFL specifically, but may have played the game at different levels, or who have learned the game through not even playing it per se. So in the NHL, we're dealing with this. Hockey is for everyone is their big tagline, but we've kind of seen through the Black Lives Matter and kind of varying messages from the NHL, whether it truly is And so like the hope is that it's changing, but I think we still have a long way to go on that side of things. We kind of looked around the league at some of the departments, and there's an estimated about 9% of analytics hires identify as female in both the NFL and the NHL. And that's really low for, like that's really, really freaking low. And it makes sense when you think that women from a young age are told like you kind of don't belong in STEM and you don't belong in sports. And so when you marry the two, you're not going to have a lot of people left over, even though they have the capacity to do the job, and to think the game and think the stats and be, really awesome analysts. We're just not seeing kind of those people make it through the pipeline to the very end. And so 9% analytics hire, I think, is something that we can really like really work on, I think. And it's unknown, but it's estimated that there's a small racial diversity in staffers, especially in the NHL. On the analytics side, especially, like I would say it's probably even less than the amount of women in analytics roles and in front offices. And so I think that this is really a place where like there has to be concerted effort and concerted conversation, concerted action to make change and make opportunities. And so we kind of have this last slide about what can change. Sarah, do you want to take some of these?
Yeah, so, the biggest is just hiring and promoting minorities, looking at different scholarships that can help, like Dani said. Look, try not to have those kind of questions being asked on job applications and like, what can you do? Like, don't, it doesn't matter whether you're a female or a male or what your background come from. Let's go from an experience and how educated you are. And really like, just, I encourage women and minorities to apply because, sometimes you feel intimidated and kind of like you don't belong because of a background or wherever you came from. But the biggest thing is to apply and to prove everyone wrong. Like it's an important part of the puzzle, and it will be. The more you apply and the more you're accepted, the larger that percent number will go up.
Yeah, and I don't think we're advocating for people to be hired who don't deserve the job. We're not just saying like hire somebody because of to fit a criteria, but also just like by really having concerted effort to like remove bias and remove privilege from the situation, then also help give opportunity to those who normally would not have it, so that when they get to the point where they're interviewing for a job, they do have experience and they are the best candidate. And it's not that they were pushed out earlier on because of finances or because they were told that they shouldn't be in STEM or in sports. Yeah. So reaching out beyond your typical network of candidates and making sure that you're, casting a broad net, and realizing that other people might have challenges. That people might be working, other jobs to get themselves through school, and that they might not be able to dedicate themselves to research full time, but that they'd still be a really great research candidate. And so I think some of that's done from a kind of at the college level, and I think in the hiring process, but some of it comes at a young age, and keeping minorities in STEM programs and making sure they feel like they belong in STEM programs from a young age, supporting professional women's sports, that there's representation that people can see. And then finally supporting youth female sports and knowing like, hey, yeah, women, you can play the sport. Like it's not this foreign concept that women can compete. And I think for a lot of us that makes sense, but really you have to have that thought constantly, because otherwise it just returns to the status quo.
Yeah, the biggest thing, just like continuing to have the hard conversations. Like it's not promoting minority and female in sport isn't edging out you as a personal, like you don't take it personally. This is competition. Sport is competition, whether it's 100 males lining up or 100 females. Like you're competing for a spot on a team. You're showing your best work. So it shouldn't be taken personally that there's other people wanting to apply that don't come from your background or your privilege. And really, like if you can continue having the conversations, and as college students, helping out with high school student minorities, like doing your like giving them resources that can help just bring up to the same level and privilege that you had growing up, it's really just changing the narrative. It begins to be a big thing, and like it's no longer a touchy subject. This is the way it's going to be.
Yeah. So no, I think Sarah ended up perfectly. So with that, our presentation is over, and we'd like to welcome any questions that anybody might have about anything today.
Thank you, guys. That was awesome. I haven't received any questions, so if any of you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them, or just unmute yourself and ask them. But nevertheless, I have a lot of questions, so we're good. So I'll start with one of my questions, and then I'll give you some of the others. My first question is, can you explain how common communication with other disciplines is where you work? Meaning, are you usually inside of your own sports analytics bubble, and you report to the GM, and then the communication with other department is through the GM, or do you actually have some sort of communication with, whether it is the coaching staff or scouts or sports medicine or even marketing? Is it something that it is very common?
Yeah, I mean, I communicate with all departments. So like we had a coaches meeting at 8:00 at night on Wednesday, and we just went over some of the things that we've done for them and explained certain concepts. And similar with scouting, we have meetings twice a week. Even if I don't say anything, you're involved in the scouting process and learning, like hearing about their calendar and learning about their due dates, so you can keep your work aligned with them. During draft meetings, we get a platform to speak about certain players that are shining in the analytics world. And so you don't want to sit there and talk about it from an analytics standpoint. You need like a 2-second blurb that's like, this guy's good because of this area and he projects well. And so communication is so important, and being able to speak different languages. It's easier for us to learn a broad sense of coaching, performance, and scouting language than it is for them to learn stats language. So being able to communicate and translate, in my opinion, that's my job.
Yeah. For me, the team is building. So every day we're adding somebody new to our marketing team or to our whatever team. And like, because we don't really have the hockey ops side built out a bunch, we don't have a sports science side built out. We don't have the trainers. We don't have all that stuff. Like we actually sat with the sales or near the sales team and got to know a lot of the sales guys really well and saleswomen really well. I got to know like the marketing people quite well. So like I think Namita jokes that like there's more, she's talked to the kind of business side of the operations more with the Kraken in like a couple months than she did in like 2 years with the Eagles. So we have a kind of unique relationship there. Not that we're doing a lot of work with them per se, but there is a lot of conversation and chat with them. And then I'm on a couple committees. We're on the engagement committee and on the diversity, equity, and inclusion committee at the team. And so I do get to kind of have kind of non-analytics work to do with the rest of the company as well.
Question from Tom. His question is for both, but especially for Sarah, since she mentioned it. What statistical methods seems to be the most useful for you, considering the balance between flexible modeling and interpretability?
Yeah, and I'll just hop in and say that in particular, of course, I'm thinking of there are lots and lots of very flexible things you can do, but Sarah mentions also that you need to get buy-in. Somebody's not going to do what you suggest them to do if it comes out of a completely black box. So you've got to somehow balance that. And I'm just wondering sort of where in the statistical spectrum you find that balance.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it's always a tough one because it depends on the question that you're asking. I find if I can visualize the results, even if it's not a black box, then it's going to come out the best. So if I'm using like a neural net or a random forest to project certain college players into the pro, well, then my projection needs to be normalized so that it can, I can compare certain players. So if you imagine like, it's like a bar chart of like player X and player Y, and they can see a height differential. Well, then there we go. That's the trade-off. So it might not be the coolest, fanciest output, but it's easy to digest.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of Bayesian methods, and Tom, I know that's going to be a fun one for you. A lot of Bayesian.
I'm a lot better with that than I used to be. It's just taken a while to sort of soften my hard outer shell.
Yeah. I think a lot of Bayesian methods specifically, especially when you're dealing with kind of trying to balance low sample results with low sample players with kind of more star players and doing more. Yeah. So using Bayesian methods, and I think everywhere I look, and Matt will laugh because I say this all the time, I think causal methods are like the right thing to be using, but that maybe I don't have the exact key, or maybe just in general the methods haven't been developed to fit the specific problem I'm looking for. But like there's so many causal questions just because we are dealing with observational data that I think if you don't use causal method, you can run into issues. And if you aren't going to use causal method, you just have to be aware of that when you're reporting stuff. And so that's something that I definitely keep in mind. And then Sarah's point is bang on. I think even if it is a black box, like if you can viz the predictions or viz the model outputs in a way that is understandable, then they don't necessarily need to know exactly what formula went into it, but they can understand I'm adjusting for these things and these are the results, and they kind of if they're communicated in the right way, I think you can use kind of black boxy methods. You just have to be smart about your outputs.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Alexander is asking further to Tom's questions. How about PCA?
Yeah, I think I haven't used a lot of it right now, but I don't see a reason why you can't use it for specific scenarios.
Yeah, it really depends on the problem that you're looking at. I've used it a couple times, but it just depends on your question.
You mentioned neural nets, and I'm slowly beginning to discover that it might be useful to run a PCA on your explanatory variables before you ram them into a neural net. Because neural nets, if they're going to choke, they choke when there's a lot of correlated variables, and they're trying to find individual weights to send forward. Those individual weights just keep getting tangled up with one another, and that's when you can slide off into bizarre local minima. But if you do the PCA first, you're getting the exact same. And if you don't do any data reduction, if you just keep all P components, even though some of them don't explain much, you're getting the exact same data space plugged into the neural net. And at the first level, you're taking linear combinations. So you can pull the exact same information out at the first level, just easier to pull it out.
Right.
So there you go, maybe a little tip.
We always try and, I mean, one of the things that you try and do is, because variables, you can look at them from a different perspective too. Like say you're looking at sacks, but you can look at a season like just straight value sacks, or sacks per play, or sacks per game. And you end up like you say, there's a lot of correlation between sacks and pressure. And so then do you keep those two together, and at what level do you want to look at, and how high is the correlation at each level? Do you picking and choosing? So working through a lot of those, like you talk about, the correlation between variables has been something that it can be enlightening too, in a certain sense, if you figure out these two statistics are like stats, not our stats, but data are very highly correlated. It can ask different questions. Well, why is that? Is there some kind of technique or some kind of information in those two variables being correlated that you can ask, like even the scouts and stuff, and they sometimes are like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like if X, Y is happening, then that happens. So it's interesting to start with that stage.
Yeah, I think Sarah has a great point. There's a lot of time spent like choosing denominators. That's like, I don't know, there's a lot of questions about what the right denominator is for a lot of these things. So it's always it's not a very exciting conversation, but it's a very important one.
Kevin is asking, what was the biggest hurdle for you in transitioning from academic environment of master's program to a full-time employment with your team? And I'm also going to add some of my question. What do you miss, or what do you like or dislike working in a professional sports environment? So for example, in a master's environment, you have much more patience, or you have more time, and then you know that, especially in this area, things take time. So if you could talk about the biggest hurdle that you have, and like the differences between academic environment and professional sports environment.
Yeah, I think I'll talk about the things I think is different. Like I love at work where you're just choosing the best tool for the job. And so you need to go to school. I felt like I needed to go to school to kind of get a lot of those tools. But now that I feel like I have a lot of those tools, like just, figuring out how to solve each problem is exciting given the tools that you have. And then the biggest change for me, I think, is just like, I don't know. I don't know, just it feels a lot like school did, except there's no classes to go to. I feel like with Matt and Lucas and Sarah and Kevin and everyone we were working with, we always had projects on the go, and so like they were always happening like outside of school hours or just like in the morning or late nights. And now it's just like I actually get to do that for my job, and so like it's the fun part of the work I was doing at school to translate it into my actual day job. So I think it's just the fun parts for me.
Yeah, and I would almost be in like I don't know, it's kind of similar, but also opposite. I think the hardest part for me is just like I struggle to keep up with new methods and to learn new methods without a school curriculum, I guess, and an actual problem and time, because we have so many things to do. And I am the only analyst that oftentimes you don't get to use the fancy method that you want because there's a deadline and there's results that need to be at here, and maybe you need to do a little more research on that method, so you're not comfortable using it or confident using it. So for me, it's just keeping up with new technology. And then also I do miss the conversations that you can have at school and the collaboration. As you grow and expand a new team, hopefully we can add some people to our team and that will come back. But some of the collaboration aspects that I'm just like, some days I'm going off into no man's land, like, well, let's hold on.
I'm definitely talking from a place of privilege and being spoiled because we don't have deadlines until expansion draft. So like there's definitely got more time crunches and things to worry about than I do. So I'm definitely lucky and definitely an outlier in that perspective.
A question from Matt. How much of the modeling work that the two of you do is reproducing work done in other sports versus new works specifically for your given sport?
I think from a scouting side and coaching side, it's a lot of reproducing, or at least getting ideas, whether it's actually using the model that they use or whatever it is, and maybe not, but it's using the concept, I guess, and what the outcome was out of it. The data is so different and it's a lot messier, and I find some papers don't exactly specify like how they got to the final data output, just like we were talking about the denominators, the different things that you go through just to get to even to the processing stage is big. From a like, I think from the performance side and like the sports athletics, those things, like that's fairly independent. Like there's a lot of data that's not talked about in the public, and it's stuff that it's exciting and new. And so we use a lot of that and come up with our own research projects that's actionable. That's the biggest key buzzword in here, is who's going to use it, who's going to buy it. From an athletic training side, can we actually make changes off of this?
Yeah, I think especially for us, again, starting everything from scratch, I think a lot of it was like boring. There's smart people doing public research and publishing papers and publishing research. So we're definitely borrowing ideas. A couple of things that we get is better data, even though there's a little bit more work going into cleaning it up. but also, you know, kind of adapting it to things that we didn't necessarily agree on with the original work, or things that we found that help make it better. So there's definitely little tinkers here and there. And then I was really proud of kind of like 4 months into, you know, just building up base level stuff, that like I was like, oh, I have an idea for a new model that's like kind of the same, but like definitely something I haven't seen publicly, and I wish I could talk about it because, you know me, I love to talk. But like I was really proud of that moment where I was like, oh, this is new, this is exciting, this is like clever, I hope. So like there is innovation that I think happens inside teams. And I think we'll continue to see innovation with tracking data if it doesn't get out in the public like I think it should. But definitely there's an incredible debt for anybody working in a team to the public who puts out their stuff and describes what they did and sometimes releases their code. Like that's, I think I'd be lying if I wanted to put up this like wall of like, oh, we do our own thing and we're super smart in here. Like, no, we're still borrowing stuff all the time.
Awesome, thanks.
I want to ask a question about skills or tools that new sports analysts that want to get a job that is very similar to you, or kind of like they want to know what should be in their toolkit. So when you just started, how different was your actual work from what you initially thought it would be, and what did you find to be your weaknesses or things that you said to yourself, oh, I wish I would have worked on that or knew that better, and maybe still things that you still kind of like working on right now. So like anything from better coding or better in data visualization or knowledge in sport. What do you think should be in this tool set or toolkit of new analysts that you feel like you missed or maybe underestimate?
I mean, I think from my perspective, the biggest thing that is sort of surprising, and it comes with the time deadline, is that sometimes if there's not a big difference in errors from a simple model to a complicated model, like you default to simple models because it's less time consuming. You can purge results, and if the error is so minimal, you know, what's the point? Whereas in academia, you're very much like 0.001 is going to make a difference. I think from a skill side, you know, like I will not hide behind the fact that I'm not a great coder. I have a lot of good ideas and sometimes I can't execute it. I was very theory in all of my education. So I wish I would have had more opportunity or taken more time to become better at coding, and like I can get it done, but it's messy and it's not cute and pretty like what you'd expect. So that would be my biggest thing, is just constantly getting better coding skills, any language, Python, R, SQL, whatever it is, just being able to learn as much as you can in that aspect.
Yeah, no, I think Sarah nailed it. The coding skills are so important. And I'm still learning and I'm still like figuring stuff out. And like, as you encounter different issues because your data size increases, well, you're going to have to figure out how to be more clever with efficiency and stuff like that, and understand how functions are working on the back end so you can optimize your functions. And then also I think from a theory side, like I've said it a couple times here, but causal inference is like so important when you're using observational data, and I wish I knew so much more. So maybe if there's anyone looking for a master's project or a PhD project or undergrad thesis project, they can do causal inference in sports, and I can yes, like Matt was asking about.
Really?
I have a question that it's probably more relevant for Sarah, but Dani, maybe you know what's going to happen in the near future. I'm wondering if other than the long term or the project that you have on a daily basis or kind of like going on constantly, Do you happen to have less strategic projects and suddenly more tactical or short-term problems to solve or projects, or so like out of the blue, there's an answer that needs to be there's a question that needs to be answered right away, and suddenly there's a new project with a very, very tight deadline that you need to work on, whether it comes from the coach as you just made it to playoff and you need to know something about the opponent, or even in-game questions or any project that happens in-game. I just want to know if there's any unexpected questions along the way that need to be answered.
Absolutely. We have an open door policy, so we get people coming on in asking these one-off questions, and depending on the severity of when they need them, you can pause everything and work on it. Or obviously with COVID, it's changing our whole landscape, so we've had to deal with a lot of impromptu questions regarding we need to collect contact tracing data, and how do we visualize it and analyze it so that we can optimize our practices and the way we're set up in the office to minimize contact. Little things like that's not something you can push to the side. That's now, training camps now. So that happens all the time. It's one of the hardest parts of the job, because you'll be invested in a project, and how hard it is to come back from something and go back into it and be like, what was I doing here? So it happens daily, not hourly.
And Dani, do you have any of those? Do you share the same experiences, or do you know if it's going to be like it when we'll actually?
Not yet, I think. I mean, we still have things that we want to get done by certain days, and that we want to get done. But if I run a model and it's not perfect, I don't stress out that I didn't have that thing ready for that day too much. It's really let's be ready for expansion draft and nail it. So yeah, there's definitely intermediate deadlines ahead of that, but we're in such a unique and lucky situation to kind of not be under the same constraints that a regular team would be at this point. But yeah, I know that day will come, and I know that will change when we have players and we have more stakeholders. Even when we get a coach versus just the GM that we're reporting to, or if we get sports science staff on, there is going to be more projects and there's going to be more stakeholders. But right now, it's just it's just not that built out yet.
Awesome. Yeah, so I know Dani needs to run. He has a meeting. So with that, I think we will wrap it up. Thank you very much again, Sarah and Dani. It was awesome. And I look forward to see all of you in the next seminar we're holding. I believe it's in 2 weeks, but more details are on the SFU Sports Analytics Group website. So thanks again, everybody, and especially Dani and Sarah. It was a pleasure, and good luck to you in the new season.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Eli. Thanks, Dani and Sarah. Well done. Thanks. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.